Welcome to Bunnell Street Art Center's Artist Talk for February 2023, in which I, Asia Freeman Artistic Director, Bunnell Street Art Center, am speaking with Ione Craney. She's a multidisciplinary artist connecting memory, access, and belonging with the rapidly changing North. She creates sensory-focused work with found material, photography, sound, text, and writing in Braille. Her work has received support from Alaska State Council on the Arts, Rasmuson Foundation, the Puffin Foundation, and a Connie Boochever Fellowship. Katie lives in Deishú, also known as Haines, a small town nestled between the mouth of a braided river and the edge of a deep, glacially carved fjord in Lingít Aaní.
So collaboration is a really important part of my process. And I wanted to start the slideshow, this artist talk, with a piece I co-created with Myrna Kelleher with Expedition Press. She has a small letterpress shop near Seattle. And our collaboration danced around words, aesthetics, poetry, thoughtful approaches to placement, place, and meaning that ultimately formed the title of the exhibition for Bunnell. We created a stack of cards to share with the text, "For a moment, we exist together for a moment." And this is printed by Myrna, and then I added the same words in Braille. The cards will be a part of the exhibition, and they'll also be a gift to those who visit. So in the image, there are two white cards, one with the text, "For a moment, we exist together for a moment." And then there's Braille embossed over the top in the text. On the right, the card is flipped over, showing how the punched Braille exists as negative space. And at the bottom of the card, there's our collaboration noted along with the year. So planning for this exhibition has been a slow accumulation of work, reading, conversations, and communications over the last 4 years or so. My access-centered making began with conversations with friends about their lived experiences with disability, my own understanding and lived experiences with myopia or severe nearsightedness, and also learning about my great-grandmother who was blind and the many holes we have in her story. We know she attended a school for the blind. She read books written in Braille, married, had 3 children. She divorced and then gave up her children for adoption. I think a lot about her while I'm making. And I think of her story, the choices she had to make or was forced to make, and how the societal norms during her life the limited expectations that have carried on through today's understanding of disability and blindness. And so the images shown here, the black and white photograph on the right is my great-grandmother, Marietta. She was about age 10 or 12 in this photo, taken at the Gary School for the Blind, where she learned to read Braille. She's wearing a turtleneck style dress with a star-shaped extension sewn around the collar. She has small dark glasses on. Her hair is tied back in a bow, and she's not smiling. The art piece on the left is titled "A Story About My Great-Grandmother," and it's a communication attempt between 2 small plates. One has a cotton grass seed head that attempts to mirror itself through the reflective plate, and the other is a small cutout of a page written in Braille in a language I haven't been able to translate. There are small silver dots painted on the Braille paper, and I think of them as mimicking the cotton grass seeds blowing in the wind. They're also quietly reflecting the viewer into the piece. And so I've been learning to write short passages in Braille in both English grade 1 and 2 with a slate and stylus that is shown in this video. Grade 1 is a letter-for-letter transcript, while grade 2 is contracted, making the Braille more compact and quicker to read. To write, one punches the paper with the stylus into the cells of the slate. And the writing is actually backwards, so it goes right to left. And all slate and stylus writing is a mirror of how the words materialize on the front of the paper. I use a program called Braille Translator to create the mirrored phrases. And so this is a silent video that I'm playing, and I'm working on a piece titled "I Am Alive." I'm using a smaller sized slate to write onto the playing card. And the cards are a thicker material, so it takes a little bit more deliberate stylus work to make sure the Braille comes through evenly. On the left is a triptych piece titled I'd Rather Feel with grade 1 Braille that is repeated over and over down pieces of mulberry paper that I then coated with a thin layer of encaustic wax. Layered under the waxed papers are images of tundra blueberries in fall, with pink, yellow, and purple leaves on the bushes. And the title and phrase I'd Rather Feel is informed by poet Natalie Diaz. And so the playing card in the video is a piece, a part of a full piece of 52 cards in the deck, and they all read, I am alive. This is the first piece that I made specifically for the show at Bunnell, and it's meant to be activated by visitor participation. I placed the cards onto a large blank piece of paper, and I'll be inviting everyone to take a card, and in exchange, they can offer something back in return through mark making, like drawing, or a place name, a person's name, a poem, or a story that helps them feel alive. And the image here is a close-up of the cards, and they're laid out side by side with I am alive in Braille grade 1, and they're placed just above the center of each card. And so aliveness has been eventually what the thread that I wanted to share throughout this exhibition. And I started questioning where, what, and who helps me feel the most alive. What memories do I hold close of feeling alive? And so looking back at my work over the years, I realized that a common thread holding my work together was imagery of glaciers and stories of ice paralleled with blueberries, blueberry dye, and the time and processing of gathering berries. There are 2 images on the screen, and there's a series of works on the left that'll be part of a salon style hanging titled Handled with Care. And this work will include a lot of different pieces with imagery of glaciers and blueberries. There'll be works with Braille phrases written on transparencies and different magnifying lenses and found materials. The image on the right is a piece titled Here Listening, and it's written in grade 1 Braille on a transparency that's layered over an oval mirror. Next to it is another oval mirror with a cutout photo transparency of a glacier in the lower half of the mirror. This is the first full body of work that I've made with accessibility in mind from the beginning of the process. A lot of the work for the show is meant to be physically engaged with in some way, with touch and sound highlighted as alternative ways to experience visual art. This is a new approach making for me, and it has required a lot of slowing down, reading, listening, and spending time thinking about the non-visual ways of experiencing art. Many of the pieces I have feel like beginnings to larger conversations, like each is its own thesis. Curator Amanda Kachia describes accessible art as, quote, a process rather than a finite goal. It is relational rather than individualized, end quote. There's a friction to creating works meant to be touched. Often we are told not to touch, and I'm interested in the power dynamics that shift in this form of engagement. And so in this image here, it's a start of a piece titled Corrective Lenses, about my eyesight, distance, and the language used to fix something that is considered or defined as wrong. These are nearly identical images of my hand holding a flat magnifier to a photograph. And there are 2 images stacked behind the magnifier. On the left, the magnifier holds into focus a bright pink blueberry bush over a tidewater glacier, though my hand holding up the magnifier is fuzzy. With the magnifier on the right, the blueberry bushes and glacier appear fuzzy and distorted while my hand is in focus. So coincidentally, while looking for papers on blueberry relations to glaciers, which there aren't really any I found, I did come across a paper titled Do Berries Listen? Berries as Indicators, Ancestors, and Agents in Canada's Oil Sands Region by Dr. Janelle Marie Baker, and she's an assistant professor at Athabasca University. Her research weaves the story of how berries not only listen, but sound back and respond to how they are treated and talked to. For example, quote, entire berry patches will pick up and move somewhere else if they are not cared for properly, end quote. This paper echoes many thoughts from a book I reference often, titled Do Glaciers Listen? Local Knowledge, Colonial Encounters, and Social Imagination by Julie Cruikshank, about the contrasting views of glaciers and how they respond to humans, challenging and blurring the concept of personhood and what constitutes something as alive. Quote, glaciers are themselves equipped with senses of hearing, sight, and smell, and are quick to respond to any careless misdirections. Glaciers seem also to have stories about humans, end quote. And this image shown here shows both the references, the book on the right and the paper on the left. So thinking about ableism, disability, and multiple ways of knowing and existing in the world, and how physically touching art creates space for slowing down, similar to the alternative communications between beings, I wanted to focus this exhibition on conversations with glaciers and berries, as I feel most alive in their presence and a deep sadness for how they reflect back to us in these so-called Anthropocene times of the climate chaos. So I've been thinking about how glaciers and blueberries are harbingers to the drastic change that we're facing, and how their changing reflects on us as access to clean water and air, food, and cultural ways of being. How glaciers and berries respond, listen, and communicate is in relation to disability, and how often something is considered legitimate or real only after proven by science or testing. And the constant westernized concept of looking for a band-aid or cure more often than looking to the root cause or the full story. Shown here are two puzzles that I made to be put together by visitors during the exhibition. On the left is a put-together puzzle of a tundra mosaic with scattered blueberry plants. On the right is a puzzle of large chunks of white and blue ice, mostly put together, though one corner of the puzzle is still in pieces. Another participatory piece I'll have is titled Carry Me, that will also become activated by holding handmade clay blueberries in your hand. I'll be asking visitors to meet me in the berry patch and share a photo of their hand holding the ghost-like berries. I hope to create a collage of some sort with all of the images I receive, and I'm really excited to see how this piece will continue. In this slide, there are two nearly identical photos. One is of the clay berries in my hand, and they are unpainted, almost resembling a haunting of what was, as a reminder of how berries respond when disrespected or mistreated. The second photo is my hand holding freshly picked berries, with their vibrant magenta juice lingering on my fingertips. So questioning how berries and glaciers respond has led me down a path of interrogating ableist language and behaviors as barriers that ripple to all aspects of life, and how confusing and problematic definitions and seemingly casual phrases in the English language can be. For example, the violent terms in photography, like shooting a camera, capturing an image, how to get the best shot, and I shot this. I've also been thinking a lot about the word access and how it carries many different meanings, especially in Alaska, where access has been taken away from Alaska Natives in the form of family, land, language, traditions, and also how access to outside or resources is often thought of as limited or plentiful, depending on the context. And so shown here are elements included in the Carry Me installation, including a full jar of white clay berries, along with a photo transparency of the tundra berry patch, and my almost cupped hand hovers over the tundra with a handful of the clay berries. Another aspect of access is cost within disabled communities. For example, access to medical and supportive care and services, to education, employment, public spaces, art events, the list goes on, and how expense is used as an excuse to not provide access. I've been thinking about this in relation to costs of care associated with living in remote, isolated communities, parallel to the cost of accessing a glacier or a berry patch, and who can afford to visit them. How access can also become an extraction, in the sense of considering the physical act of money and privilege buying one's way to witness it. The need or desire to see it, to believe it, or to see it before it's gone. So in thinking about sound and its many definitions in relation to access and cost, when I read a news clip about how researchers are recording songs of melting glaciers, I immediately contacted the author of the story, cryoseismologist Ione Craney at the University of Oslo, Norway, about his research recording glaciers at the depths of their base where ice meets bedrock, and how he and his team can identify how a glacier moves based on the sounds or the vibrations the glaciers make. Shown here are two images from Ugo. On the left is an aerial view of the approach to their study site on the Kongskeven Glacier, located on an island in the Svalbard archipelago in the Arctic Ocean. On the right, Ugo photographed a sound designer trying to capture the sound of a skua, a bird that lives in polar regions. With Ugo's gracious permission, I wrote a sound description to one of his glacier recordings that he lovingly titled Breath of Arctic Glaciers. A sound description is a written depiction of key elements of an audio recording. So this installation will have a set of headphones to listen to the recording, paired with the sound description and a Braille transcription, which are both shown here, along with the imagery from Ugo. The sound description was born out of questioning how science, particularly climate change-focused research, is communicated to marginalized communities. It has been shown over and over that disabled communities do not have easy access to scientific research or are provided space or voice in climate disaster preparation and planning. I couldn't help but question the cost of access to this type of research on a remote island far above the Arctic Circle. How research and travel to remote glaciated regions is extractive, yet can also be meaningful if and when the information gathered there is equitably collected and shared. So we'll listen to the sound recording titled Breath of Arctic Glaciers, and then I'll read the description after we listen to the recording. So that's a 1-minute track. Enclosed and submerged underwater, a pressurized humming overlaps with an erratic scratching needle of a nearby vinyl record. Distant thunder echoes in a cavernous chamber. Small pebbles or sand slough off a crumbling wall. Suddenly, the earth gives out underfoot to bending, wobbling waves of dense metal rolling, reverberating, and folding into itself. The vibrations fade back to the consistent crackling, skipping record needle. Further away, thunder bounces off darkness. And the Braille transcription shown here is just what it looks like when I use the Braille translator program, and is kind of an idea of how it will appear on the page. Continuing with the interrogation of language, I wanted to bring in words by some of my favorite writers who challenge normative ways of speaking, knowing, and being. This is an in-progress image of 3 pieces I made with wax and blueberry dye on fabric that holds quotes shown left to right by Billy Ray Belcourt, Jerome Ellis, and Jen Rose Smith. These emerged first through a written piece titled Cryogenics, which is a poetic meditation on life with glaciers by Dr. Jen Rose Smith, and she's Deishú Iak from Cordova. and is currently an assistant professor at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. She writes about the intersections of coloniality, race, and indigeneity through an icescape lens. And her words cut through ice like a hot knife. So I knew I wanted to include them in some way in this work. So I reached out to Jen, and she granted me permission to share her words, which I thought at first I would project onto a mirror to then reflect back into the room and on the viewer, though I felt the pang to include blueberries with her words in some way. Paired with the fabric of the blueberry dyed pieces is a piece of mulberry paper that has the same quote with the transcribed Braille. From Jen's story Cryogenics, the waxed words on her piece read, quote, "Glacier has a face. Glacier's eyes stare down the barrel of my grandfather's gun. Squeeze the trigger. Give 'em hell. Calve, baby, calve. Glacier, a puddle. Glacier, a monsoon, a tsunami. Glacier, a plaque, a siren," end quote. So after I made her piece, I wanted to create a few more to bring other voices into this space. And I reached out to musician and poet Jerome Ellis and author Billy Ray Belcourt for permission to share their words in the same way. So these are images of Jerome's piece in progress. And Jerome is a Black disabled artist and proud stutterer. Through music, literature, performance, and video, he shares relationships among Blackness, disabled speech, divinity, nature, sound, and time. Born to Jamaican and Granadan immigrants, he now lives in Norfolk, Virginia. This is an excerpt from his book, The Clearing, that came out last year, and also has a complement album that goes with it by the same name. The images shown here are the work in progress with his words. So the waxed words show up on the left there before being dyed, and the image on the right is the dyed piece and it's drying. We can try this. I have queued up a link to take us to the actual recording of Jerome reading these words, and we can give it a try and see if we can hear it. So
sound is vibration, a wavering band of energy, endless restlessness. For us to perceive sound waves emitting from the sound source must make our eardrums vibrate. Sound is vibration.
He's a musician, and so he plays a lot of different instruments, and that's a part of the whole album is actually a musical album, but then he has a book that goes with it. And so the image here, the quote that I gathered from his book actually show up a little bit different in the book than they do on what we just saw on the YouTube clip. Because he includes a sound description in the book. And so I have to get kind of close to the screen to read it, but he basically is visualizing his stutter with the use of the T's and the V's. And you'll see in the paragraph that starts with "for us," he has all these T's, and then he includes the sound description of the music that he's making, and he describes it as "saxophones flare again and flare for longer. Eternity taught by humpback whales." And so that was how he was describing the sounds that he was creating, which I thought was really beautiful. Yeah, and this is a piece that I made for Billy Ray Belcourt. And I also just want to mention that in the exhibition, I'm going to include a reference library with the physical books that I'm referring to often, because they just show up again and again throughout the work. And I think it's just really important to have them be available. So there will be a copy of Jerome's book, The Clearing. There'll be a copy of Jen's essay, and then there'll also be a couple of books by Billy Ray. And the decision to include the reference library in the gallery space is a nod to how Billy Ray Belcourt brings other writers into his work. He's almost including like an appendix of people that have inspired and helped shape his being throughout the poems and the essays he writes. And so this piece is a line from a poem called "I Become Less of Who I Am" in his book, NDN Coping Mechanisms, Notes from the Field. And I mirrored the quote to echo back what I've learned from him and how thoughtfully he shares who and what has informed his work as a queer writer, and he's an academic from the Driftpile Cree Nation. His line on the blueberry paper, or the blueberry fabric, reads, quote, "I will go on like this forever, the earth ringing in my chest," end quote. And it's also important to think about for accessibility, including these written words in multiple formats. And so in the exhibition, there'll be QR codes that will take visitors to author websites and other just different formats to be able to access the work in different ways. And there'll be a handful of works throughout the show that will have QR codes that take you to various places. So I have pieces to share, and this one involves writing image descriptions. This is a photo of the planning stages for a participatory installation that began with a call for photo submissions titled, "What did you see? How did you feel?" where over 50 people contributed photographs. On the submission form, I asked a few optional questions about the photograph being submitted, including any memories the image conjures, and if any sound memories were associated with the photograph. There was also an optional space to share 1 or 2 sentence image description of the submission, and a yes/no checkbox. Image descriptions were a part of the submitter's normal sharing of their photographs online and in social media spaces. A few prompted questions revealed so much about the images that would have likely remained unknown if a description wasn't added. So therefore, the photographs become slightly more human by learning a little bit more about the person who shared the photo. And so pretty amazingly, I received photographs from Chukotka to Australia, Tunisia to the Brooks Range, often with very personal stories accompanying them. The written narrative provided through each photo and description and distilled the description to the essence of what was shared. The descriptions themselves feel like a living history where space for intimacy is held and shared. And surprisingly, and maybe unsurprisingly, there were multiple submissions with glacier imagery and one specifically of blueberries. So I was pretty excited to see that overall theme continue through this work. So in this slide, there are 3 photographs in clear plastic card cases, and they're mounted onto small wooden blocks to a wall. Behind the photographs are handwritten descriptions of the images. And from top and clockwise, these are submitted images from Summerham, Jenny Irene Miller, and John Hagen. On the right are some of the descriptions that I've distilled down, though I won't be reading them all here. And so some of the card cases will also have a magnifying lens inside the card. And they almost act like a different way of view finding. And this image here was submitted by Holly Bracker. The 2 photos show 2 different instances of trying to read the description mounted into the wall with the magnifier. The description of the image is, quote, "Clean, damp air tickles noses and lungs while walking barefoot through bright ferns surrounded by thick fog," end quote. So for the installation, some cards will hang off the wall and be paired with their written description. Many of the cards will be in a small box, like the one shown at the bottom of the image here, where visitors can thumb through the card cases and look at and hold up the images and try to match the image with the descriptions that will be mounted on the wall next to it. Images shown hanging away from the wall from left to right are from Sean Johnson. And then you can see Jenny Irene Miller's images in the box below. And then on the top of that hanging is an image that was submitted anonymously. And I wanted to read the description for that piece. The description for the top piece hanging is, one of many painted orange hearts hangs on a living tree along the Goat Island Trail, honoring over 6,000 children found in unmarked graves, end quote. And so sharing alt text and written descriptions in the images that we share in online spaces becomes a gesture of care that is also an essential part of accessibility. Writing descriptions allows space for slowing down, the capitalist drive for instant content creation, and it supports cross-disability solidarity and cross-movement solidarity. As artist and curator Sam Lee states, quote, "Access and decolonization are in relation," end quote. I also wanted to mention that this work about image descriptions has been informed greatly by the Alt Text is Poetry project and workbook, which is by New York-based disabled artists Bojana Kokliat and Shannon Finnegan. And I'll be including a copy of their workbook that will be available next to the installation in the show for anyone who wants to learn more about their work and think about how to use poetry as a form of sharing. So the last piece I want to share is titled Dasa Yi Satin Wasa Ji Idanuk. I've slowly started learning Tlingit in some online courses to create this piece in respect to the land and people of the place I call home. The Tlingit language, Tlingit Yuhatangi, is beautiful, and I find I identify with Tlingit place names and definitions more than I often do with English place names. The two phrases are questions, stemming from the beginning Tlingit workbook and the Sea-Alaska Heritage Institute Tlingit language learning app. And these were sourced during a language class taught by Hune Lance Twitchell. Including these phrases in Tlingit without the immediate translation is a nod to the wearable art piece titled Yahin Away Yakutsiti by Kachgun Rochelle Smallwood. And she was disqualified. Her whole wearable art piece was disqualified for sharing her piece entirely in Tlingit, the title, the description, and the music, which had no immediate English translation. And the questions in this piece actually translate to the piece that I just shared. What do you see? How do you feel? And the slide shows two photographs with different views of the art pieces. The top art piece has bold, all cap black lettering. The phrase in Tlingit, Dasa Yisatin, is in a pale faded green background that resembles glacial silt in water. The art piece below it has the same black lettering and reads in Tlingit, Wasaji Idanuk, over a slightly faded image of the tundra blueberries. On the right is a close-up image showing that the lettering is textured and sparkly. And so by making this work about access as the central part of the entire process from the beginning, I've learned that access and sensory-focused work is laced with a reimagining of what's possible, and it allows space to think about care and comfort of an entire room of people, like we, or at least many of us, have learned during the ongoing pandemic. Access can be a creative, dynamic tool beyond ADA compliance and checked boxes. This work confronts difficult questions about who is missing from any given space, and I hope that there is an aliveness that surfaces through the work, which sometimes may seem very minimal or subtle, like providing image descriptions, though those are no less important. My goal is that any visual art I create, whether shared on the internet or in a gallery or a public space, holds a relational exchange or some level of reciprocity. I am always asking myself how my art gives, and creating access-centered work has become a way of remembering, re-engaging, and paying attention to welcoming, giving, and generosity. And it also creates a safe space for holding care through art. And so I'll close us out with a final image description of this slide, which is a reflective self-portrait of myself waving to you through 9 square boxes with a mirror-like material on the top of them. They are shadowy and they have written descriptions on each box. So thank you so much for listening and joining. I don't give very many talks, especially in Zoom world. So it's important to say the things though, right? Like, I think writing about art is equally as important to the making of it. So
I definitely think that your work demonstrates your commitment to communication on so many levels. And I'm particularly fascinated by the intersection between your work and Indigenous futurism, actually. This reimagining of what's possible, especially through relational exchange and reciprocity.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I think because I mean, I do read quite a bit about, so many people doing incredible work for, in those spaces, and I'm definitely informed by a lot of Indigenous artists, and have so much gratitude for, for them teaching us and, helping us along as we're, trying to figure things out and make space for that conversation. And I have so many other pieces I wanted to talk about. And one of them is about AI generated captions and just how terrible and, I mean, unfortunately funny they are, because they're just like nothing of what the actual image is showing. And like the picture of my hand holding the blueberries, like the actual blueberries, one of the AI captions that I found was broccoli. Like, it was just like, that was a one-word description of the image, and I was like, that is absolutely like nothing even close, maybe the green color. But it's just really important to think about how we share, what we share, and just taking a little bit of extra time. Like, if you're putting a photo on your website, like making sure to include that alt text so that the image doesn't just say image, but it actually gives some context, because otherwise, anybody who uses a screen reader or has low vision and can't see the image, that's what they're hearing through a screen reader, is like broccoli, when you know that they're talking about blueberries, but it can just be really confusing in that way. And so it's been a really beautiful process to slow down and think about, why am I sharing it, and who am I sharing it for, and what value, what is the value in sharing if it's not available to everyone in the same way, in the equitable way. So I have to say, I mean, I've learned so much from other, artists, disabled artists that are challenging just the normative day to day through just their existence. Like, and I've read that a lot about indigeneity and Indigenous existence. It's like, just being disabled or Indigenous or of any marginalized group is a form of resistance in itself, just by simply existing, which I don't know if we hear that very often as a white person or a pale-skinned person that hasn't had to think about where I exist in space as often as others do. Definitely have learned so much from, if you're familiar with Natalie Diaz, she's an incredible Mojave Latina poet, and just explores language and the complications with it, and not trusting words necessarily, because they just have so many different meanings. One piece I'll have in the show that I didn't quite have it ready to share in the slideshow today, but is a sound recording of all of the definitions of the word sound and sight, and just how confusing and complicated those two simple words that seem simple are not, because they have just so many different meanings depending on the context of which of how it is said or what conversation it is in. And so it's been interesting, like thinking of Natalie, and she has a saying, where she just doesn't trust words. so often, some words especially. And it's been an interesting way to really like sit down and think about the words that you use, like especially with ableism and ableist language and violent language, and to try to just be really thoughtful about how we communicate with each other and how easy it is to just not necessarily be lazy, but not think about it if we haven't had to or haven't had the violent path that others have had. So yeah, there's so much to to dive into.